Right off the bat, the judge is making it crystal clear. Homelessness might explain desperation, but it doesn't excuse crime. Tough love, courtroom edition. Intro, boom, third-degree felony. That's no small slap on the wrist. We're talking up to 10 years behind bars. Imagine sitting in that seat hearing those numbers. Intro. Oof. The judge isn't just asking about his crimes, she's drilling into his life choices. Kids, stability, responsibility. It's like a legal cross-examination of his parenting. Intro. Here's the bigger picture. Taxpayers footing the bill. This judge is basically saying, we're tired of cleaning up your mess. Do you agree with her take, or is that too harsh? Intro. This part hits. Mom wouldn't let him back home because he didn't want to follow her rules. A reminder that sometimes family boundaries are tougher than prison walls. Intro. And there it is. 8 years deferred adjudication with strict conditions. It's probation, yes, but on a razor's edge. One slip-up, and it's straight to prison. A moment that could live beyond the walls of that committee room. The murmurs in the chamber grew louder. The chatter online became relentless. Viewers were not just watching a clash of personalities. They were watching a contest between two visions of America, one built on arrogance and interruption, the other on dignity and resilience. This wasn't just politics, it was a showdown for dignity itself. And the next words spoken in that chamber would either deepen the insult or deliver the beginning of a reckoning. To truly understand the weight of Ted Cruz's interruptions, you have to step back and look at the man behind them. The patterns, the contradictions, the trail of arrogance that brought him to that chair in the first place. Because what unfolded in that hearing wasn't an isolated outburst. It was the natural extension of a career defined by smugness, entitlement, and the belief that rules bend for him. Cruz has long styled himself as a warrior for American values, but those who have watched closely see the cracks in that image. His rise through politics has always carried an air of superiority, a sense that he alone holds the keys to truth. Colleagues on both sides of the aisle have described him with the same word, time and again: smug. He wears that smugness like armor, walking into debates not to engage in dialogue, but to dominate with interruptions, barbed quips, and the occasional grandstanding monologue designed more for viral clips than actual governance. It isn't just his tone, it's his contradictions. He talks about defending freedom, but has supported measures that restrict voting access. He preaches about accountability, yet when his own state of Texas froze during a deadly winter storm, he was caught boarding a plane to Cancun. That image of him, suitcase in hand while his constituents shivered in the dark, became a national symbol of abandonment. Even after returning under public pressure, his explanations were laced with excuses, not responsibility. The arrogance of believing he could escape unscathed spoke volumes. And then there's his relationship with power. Cruz has a long record of aligning himself with movements that thrive on silencing others. He talks about the sanctity of the Constitution while cherry-picking which parts deserve his defense. He has railed against cancel culture, yet has repeatedly tried to drown out opposing voices in hearings, reducing opponents to props in his performances. To Cruz, politics is not dialogue. It's theater, and in his mind he is always the star. His reputation among colleagues underscores this. Senator Lindsey Graham once joked that if you killed Ted Cruz on the Senate floor, no one would convict you. That kind of remark doesn't come lightly. It reflects years of eye rolls, sidelong glances, and bipartisan disdain for someone who confuses arrogance with leadership. And yet, Cruz wears that disdain almost proudly, as though it confirms his outsider brand, when in reality it reveals just how toxic his presence has become. His arrogance has often backfired, but rather than learn, he doubles down. During the 2016 presidential race, Donald Trump insulted his wife and attacked his father. Cruz at first bristled, calling Trump a pathological liar, but later bent the knee, endorsing the very man who humiliated his family. The contradiction was glaring. A man who presents himself as unyielding revealed himself as willing to bow when it served his ambition. For many, that was the moment the mask slipped. His principles weren't fixed, they were negotiable. His dignity wasn't untouchable, it was expendable. And yet, he still carries himself as though untouchable. Watch him in hearings, and you'll see the pattern. Leaning forward, pointing fingers, speaking over colleagues. The dismissive tone, the scoffs, the rolling eyes. They're all trademarks of someone who believes interruption is the same thing as intelligence. To him, volume equals victory. But to those watching, the arrogance is impossible to ignore. That arrogance has shaped public perception. To his base, he is a fighter, someone unafraid to clash with opponents. But to many Americans, he is the embodiment of entitlement. A man who talks of patriotism while fleeing to Cancun, who speaks of principles while sacrificing them for political convenience, who interrupts not to defend truth, but to assert ego. And in that committee room, every ounce of that arrogance was on full display. Each interruption wasn't just a tactic, it was the latest chapter in a long history of dismissiveness. Each smirk carried the weight of years spent belittling others. Cruz wasn't just interrupting Jasmine Crockett, he was repeating the same performance he'd staged countless times before. But here's the flaw with arrogance. It blinds you. It convinces you that dominance is permanent, that smugness is strength. Cruz believed his interruptions were keeping him in control, that his dismissiveness would rattle his opponent. What he didn't realize was that the more he leaned into arrogance, the more he set himself up for humiliation. Because arrogance can carry you for a while, but eventually it becomes your downfall. And Cruz, in that chamber, had no idea just how close he was to the moment that would shatter his performance. To understand why Jasmine Crockett's composure in that hearing carried such power, you need to know where she came from. Because Crockett's story is not one of privilege or inherited influence. It is a story of resilience carved out of humble beginnings, of battles fought in courtrooms long before she ever set foot in Congress, of a voice shaped by service and sharpened by struggle. Born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, Crockett's life was far from insulated. She grew up in a working-class family that understood sacrifice not as a slogan, but as a daily reality. From an early age, she saw firsthand the inequities that thread through American life. Neighbors juggling two jobs just to stay afloat. Friends punished more harshly because of the color of their skin. Families who believed in the dream of democracy but were often denied its promises. Those images didn't leave her. They ignited something within her. Her path to politics wasn't direct. She didn't begin as someone craving the spotlight. She started as an advocate, a lawyer who chose to represent those most often overlooked. Criminal defense wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. Day after day, she walked into courtrooms where the odds were stacked against her clients, where resources were thin and prejudice was thick. She carried the weight of knowing that her words might be the only shield standing between someone and injustice. And she did it not for fame, but because she believed deeply that justice should not be reserved for the wealthy or the well-connected. It should belong to everyone. Her reputation grew as a fighter, not in the sense of loud theatrics, but in the sense of relentless advocacy. She took on cases others dismissed. She fought for clients others had written off. For her, every case was a moral stand, every argument an affirmation of dignity. Colleagues noted her empathy, her ability to listen, to connect, to humanize those the system tried to dehumanize. She didn't just argue cases. She told stories that forced judges and juries to see her clients as people, not statistics. This grounding in community service, in defense of the vulnerable, would later shape her politics. When she ran for office, it wasn't out of ambition alone. It was out of necessity. She saw the gap between those in power and those suffering under policies crafted without their voices. She knew that representation mattered, not as a buzzword, but as a lifeline. For communities long ignored, having someone who understood their struggles was more than symbolic. It was survival. Her campaign was never fueled by wealth or establishment machinery. It was fueled by volunteers, by grassroots energy, by the belief that someone who had lived the fight could carry it into the halls of power. Her speeches weren't polished rehearsals crafted by consultants. They were authentic, drawn from lived experience. She spoke about poverty, about inequality, about the immigrant experience and the pain of families separated, about the relentless struggle of working people who give more to this country than they ever get back. Her authenticity resonated because it wasn't manufactured. It was earned. And when she won, it wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for every person who had ever felt invisible. She carried those voices into Congress, refusing to let them be drowned out by arrogance or silenced by tradition. Her presence itself was a statement that the chambers of power were not reserved for the entitled few, but open to those who had clawed their way in through grit and service. Even in Washington, she never shed her grounding. She remained approachable, speaking plainly, refusing to adopt the polished detachment that so often insulates politicians from reality. She knew who she was fighting for, and she never let them forget it. Every speech, every committee hearing, every policy battle was measured not by how it played in headlines, but by how it impacted the people she served. And so, when Ted Cruz tried to silence her with interruptions, Crockett wasn't just another politician fending off a colleague's arrogance. She was a woman forged in struggle, a lawyer trained in hostile courtrooms, a representative who carried her community on her back. She knew what it was to be dismissed, to be talked over, to be underestimated. She had faced it before, countless times, and each time she turned condescension into fuel. Her calm that day wasn't accidental. It was the product of years spent mastering restraint in the face of provocation. Where others might have lashed out, she knew the value of timing. She knew that the most powerful answer isn't always the quickest. It's the one that lands with precision, the one that turns arrogance into silence. Viewers watching may not have known every detail of her biography, but they could feel it. They could sense the authenticity, the quiet strength that came from someone who had lived the fight she was now embodying. Every pause, every steady look, every measured response told the story. This was not someone who could be rattled into silence. Her humility was her armor. Her empathy was her sword. Her resilience was the foundation on which she stood. And it was these very qualities that armed her for the clash ahead. The atmosphere in the committee room shifted from tense to electric as the exchange deepened. Ted Cruz, emboldened by his earlier interruptions, leaned forward in his chair like a predator circling its prey. His voice grew sharper, his tone increasingly dismissive, each word designed not to seek truth, but to belittle. He waved his hand as if swatting away Crockett's points, his gestures impatient, his smirk widening with each interjection. "Representative, let's not waste everyone's time with speeches," he sneered, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Stick to the facts if you have any." The jab wasn't just verbal, it was theatrical, a performance aimed at belittling her intellect in front of the nation. Gasps echoed softly from the spectators, while his allies smirked along, savoring the spectacle. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Her face remained composed, her body language steady. She let his words hang in the air, absorbing them like a shield rather than firing back immediately. That composure unsettled him more than any shouted retort could have. Cruz, sensing his dominance slipping, pushed harder. He leaned back with exaggerated arrogance, then snapped forward, jabbing his finger in her direction. You're dodging. That's what you people always do. You dodge when the real questions come up. His voice rose above the room, sharp enough to silence even the faint whispers in the back rows. The arrogance was on full display, but cracks were beginning to show. The more he interrupted, the more desperate he appeared, as if sheer volume could cover the weakness in his argument. His smirk started to feel strained, his gestures increasingly frantic. What he meant as control now looked like flailing. The room could feel it. The balance was shifting. Crockett, however, remained unshaken. She straightened her papers with deliberate calm, her silence speaking louder than his noise. Every second she refused to be baited added to the suspense. Her eyes never left him, her expression steady, almost surgical. She wasn't ignoring him. She was studying him, waiting for the exact moment to strike. And the spectators felt that tension. They leaned forward in their seats. The cameras zoomed closer. Viewers at home clutched their phones, tweeting out disbelief at his arrogance, admiration at her restraint. It was as though the whole country had been pulled into the standoff. Cruz pressed again, his tone mocking now. If you can't answer, just admit it. Spare us the theatrics. The irony of the statement hung in the air, almost laughable coming from him. Yet he delivered it with absolute confidence. He was certain he had the upper hand, but his certainty was his mistake. Crockett finally adjusted her microphone, the smallest gesture, but it sent ripples through the room. Her calm composure signaled something different, something brewing. She hadn't been silenced, she had been calculating. The room began to quiet. Even Cruz, still mid-rant, seemed to sense a shift. His words grew louder, but their power grew weaker. He was drowning himself out while she was drawing power from restraint. And then, at last, she leaned forward ever so slightly, her voice measured but firm. She hadn't yet spoken her full reply, but the weight of her preparation was palpable. Every eye in the chamber turned to her, every camera lens fixed. Even Cruz, for all his bluster, instinctively paused, sensing that something was about to land with devastating force. Then the room froze, waiting for the reply.